welcome Chief Justice McMurtry, and even though you moved on to other things, I'm going to keep referring to you as Chief Justice McMurtry for this discussion.
Well, I won't object.
And I want to touch on some of the many hats you've worn in your very successful career. But the theme of this colloquium, of course, is legal history. And this is also, I know, the points that you want to highlight for the U of T community as the 2010 Goodman Lecturer as well. And so I wanted to begin by asking you why legal history has been such a constant interest in your career, from the establishment of the Osgood Society through to a range of other conferences and initiatives. Why did this catch your attention, and why has it been such an enduring priority for you?
Well, first of all, Lorne and I grew up in a legal family. My father was a trial lawyer, and he shared many stories with his four sons around the dinner table and elsewhere, so I was brought up in that atmosphere. And I lived on a street where there were some very notable lawyers like John Robinette and Eddie Goodman's father, David Goodman, and Edson Haynes and John Pickup. And so from a young age, the law was very much a part of my life. And then when I went to university, I took what they used to call the old honor history course, or modern history course. And it was a great time to take history at the U of T, because many of the giants of Canadian legal history were still there, led by Donald Creighton and Morris Careless and Frank Underhill and others. So I was very interested in the idea of history. And actually, when I went to university, I had thoughts of becoming a history teacher. And football and hockey coach are sort of interest to me. And I think part of the reasons was that I admired my father enormously, but, you know, he cast a pretty big shadow. But unfortunately, he had a serious stroke when he was only 53 and left the practice of law. But anyway, he was a great influence in my life, and the history that I studied at the U of T gave me an interest in history. And when I got to law school and in the early years, I was very conscious of the fact that so many of the stories and the history that I had heard, not only from my father, but other lawyers, most notably Arthur Maloney, who probably was my principal mentor as a young lawyer, and realizing that this was all disappearing into the mists of time, and very little was done, with the exception of John Hansberger, who I think did a very good job of editing the old Law Society Gazette. And John's work was part of the inspiration or motivation, and to sort of expand on that. And of course, John has been a director of the Osgood Society since its inception, since its formal inception in 1979.
So that explains a little bit of your personal connection to legal history. But for those young lawyers, those students who don't have such an inspiration in their family and around the dinner table, what do you think legal history can mean for them now that, because of the work of the profession, the Osgood Society, the law schools, and the community, they can get exposed to these stories and the context in which they've now entered a very different kind of profession than the one that existed in the past? What is
yes, well, one of my ongoing concerns, shared by many people in the profession, is that we may be losing some of the traditions of the legal profession as a profession. I mean, to me, it's become more and more of a business, and I think that's unfortunate, because I think the society as a whole benefits if the traditional professions, traditional professionalism is maintained. And I think particularly as the legal profession, as a helping profession, and I think some of that motivation is lost. And of course, we're all familiar with the old statement, or to the effect that if we don't know where we've been, it's going to be difficult to really know where we're going. And I think this is very important. And there was a very much a lack of recorded legal history, with some few exceptions in history in Canada. I mean, for example, in England, there seemed to be much more of a culture of writing biographies about judges, lawyers, famous lawyers, and famous trials, and which did not exist in Canada.
So we're here today picking up on that theme in part because as Chief Justice, you were instrumental in initiating the Chief Justice of Ontario Advisory Committee on Professionalism and the revival of professionalism that my generation of academics and lawyers has witnessed over the past 10, 15 years is very much the fruits of that endeavor. But apart from that sense you've mentioned of wanting to recover the helping profession ideal, what led you to embark on the Advisory Committee on Professionalism, the collaboration with the Law Society and the law schools, and again marking this occasion as the end of a cycle that has created new literatures where they didn't exist before and new conversations that weren't happening before? What led to it all?
Well, there were a number of people involved. From my former court, Steve Gouge and I think John Morden had been interested in these concepts. Now Justice Paul Perel involved in many of these informal discussions, Marvin Huberman, and Bob Armstrong, who later joined the Court of Appeal, was the treasurer. And we had a number of discussions about the concept. And I was a little sensitive about the name of the committee because I didn't want it to appear that the Chief Justice was trying to sort of impose his views on the profession. It had to be obviously a shared responsibility and very much a collaborative effort. But I was persuaded, really, that this would be the best way to go about it, and so the advisory committee was formed.
So what's been your perspective or perception of the change in professionalism from the time you first entered the profession as a young lawyer to the young lawyers you see coming out today?
Of course, it was a much different profession when I was called to the bar. I hate to admit it was a mere 52 years ago. And the profession was much smaller. I mean, I don't recall the numbers, but only a small fraction, relatively small fraction of the number of lawyers in Ontario today. And as a result, I think it helped maintain a level of professionalism because lawyers knew each other, generally speaking, much better than they know today because the profession has become so large. And with the lack, and with that lack of personal knowledge of one's colleagues, I think this brings some challenges. I mean, that adversely affect the level of professionalism. Civility, obviously, is a constant theme that has been addressed in recent years. But again, I was very impressed by the fact that again, without sounding too trite, that the legal profession as a helping profession had been well established. And I mean, I was a practicing lawyer for 9 years before there was a fee for service, a legal aid plan. And all legal aid, and I was mostly interested in the courts and the criminal courts, that was done on a pro bono basis. And I think the rights of the accused and were respected. I don't say to a greater extent, but I think perhaps that was the way. And lawyers gave of their time because they thought it was part of their professional responsibility, professional duties. Now, it was a less complicated age in many respects because criminal trials, I mean, the sheriff's secretary who basically ran the legal aid program in Toronto would phone up somebody like John Robinette and ask him to take on, say, a murder defense, although John did mostly civil work. He was a very successful defense lawyer and well known because of the very Sossin and Jackson case and the Evelyn Dick case. But again, it was a little easier for lawyers to contribute their time because most criminal cases, including the great majority of serious cases, murder cases, etc., never took more than about a week to try. It was a very different legal trial culture. And I mean, Arthur Maloney, who I came to know the first year quite well of my career as a result of a case that I took, I mean, he became a very close friend and an important mentor for me, and we worked on a number of things together. But even, I mean, I can remember talking about professionalism, and again, maybe as a young lawyer, you tend to be more, well, I'm not sure what the right word is, but I mean, you take greater advantage then, I think, of the professional advice that was available from the senior members of the profession, whether it was Arthur Maloney, Arthur Martin, John Arnott, John Robinette, of course, John. And I remember being in the middle of a criminal jury trial, and a juror collapsed during my jury address. And I had, in those days, we had a right to a new trial. The criminal code has been changed if you lose a juror. And I didn't, I mean, I wanted to think about it. The judge tried to push me on, but I thought nothing of bouncing down the street from the old city hall where the trial was being held to barge into Arthur Martin's office, and who I knew, and he was just going out for lunch, but he sat down and we talked about the case, and he gave me some very good ideas as how to stage the consent with respect to proceeding with only 11 jurors. But I mean, that was the type of atmosphere because your paths cross on a more regular basis, so there was a greater accessibility to mentoring.
So when you started out, you've mentioned the importance of mentoring in your early career. Where did that culture of mentoring come from?
Well, it was a product largely of a much smaller profession, right, a much more collegial profession. And at the old Osgood Law School, many of our lecturers, as you know, were professionals. I mean, we're practicing lawyers. And so that helped. And we had a very small professional staff. I mean, certainly the quality of the teaching is probably higher today than it was then in many respects, and there was more diversity in the subjects that could be chosen. But on the other hand, at an early age, we were exposed to a number of successful lawyers, and came to know them to some extent as a result. Of course, at Old Osgood, we were right in the center of the courts area. I mean, the trials were all held in those early days at the old City Hall. And so you'd move from your classroom to a courtroom if you heard something interesting was going on. Right. But again, a lot of it had to do with the size of the profession.
So what in your view is the way by which we can ensure an inclusive legal community for those who are breaking barriers or perceive themselves to be on the outside?
Well, I mean, again, it's been a dramatic difference. I mean, when I started at law school, it was basically a white male bastion. And I think of a class of 250, we had only 7 women, and this was starting in 1954. Now, this did not change in any significant way until about 1970, and lawyers of color were, I mean, there just were no law students, and I think this issue has become a very serious one. I mean, certainly female lawyers had a more challenging time in their early years. I think a great deal has been accomplished by the leadership that is now provided by the women lawyers and women judges, but it wasn't always that way. Even my own eldest daughter, who's a high court judge in Saskatchewan, you know, she had to battle the old boys network in her early years, and it was not easy. I think we have so many female women leaders in the profession. I think that issue has largely been resolved, but I still hear concerns expressed from people in the large law firms, some of whom allege that there is a bit of a glass ceiling aspect to women to becoming senior partners. I mean, I haven't been back in the law long enough to really judge that, but in any event, I think most of those issues are being addressed. But where I really worry about is take the black lawyers, for example. I mean, I've been active in the black community for many years, and I'm fortunate to have many friends in that community. And I speak to many black lawyers during the course of a year, and many of them are frustrated by the fact that they don't have access to a sufficient number of black lawyers to get the advice they need. Although I think there is this Canadian Association of Black Lawyers that is a very good initiative, but I think that it still is a challenge for a diverse profession, because many of them do feel frustrated. And again, one of the things that I've heard on many occasions in recent years in dealing with the issues related to the administration of justice is the fact that when a black accused, forget about the black lawyers for a moment, when a black accused goes into a courtroom in the Greater Toronto area in particular, they don't see anybody in the courtroom that looks like them. And I mean, I think that is a very serious issue for the profession in dealing with these issues, because certainly work that I've done, such as the report that I did with Alvin Curling on the roots of youth justice in Ontario, I mean, I've met with many groups of young black people and who really genuinely feel that they're discriminated against unfairly in the justice system.
So when there is a situation that puts the rule of law in jeopardy, should lawyers feel under siege and compelled to take action in those occasions as well?
An event where I feel there was a very inadequate, if not pathetic, response in Canada was the 1970 October crisis in Quebec. And that's something I felt that the legal profession, outside of Quebec in particular, I mean, the response was very inadequate and if not pathetic. And I remember writing a letter to the Globe and Mail within 2 or 3 days as a young lawyer and expressing my concern whether Canada was becoming a banana republic. And I remember lawyer friends of mine who read the letter saying to me, "Aren't you afraid that this letter, if read by some of your clients, some of your corporate clients are going to be annoyed at you?" Because the people in Ontario and I suspect the rest of Canada seem to be, I mean, as long as it was the Francophones that were being locked up, we're not worrying about it very much. I mean, to me, this has always been a very unhappy chapter.
So you can cast your mind back to your first day at Osgoode Hall Law School in the 1950s. What was on your mind? What were you thinking about the career you were about to embark on?
Well, I'm embarrassed to some extent to admit that I didn't even start law school until the end of November. I had switched over, believe it or not, from medical school. And I think I had been admitted to medical school. Well, again, I was Roy Jr., and I admired and loved my father incredibly, but again, he cast quite a shadow, not for my late brother Bill, who always wanted to be a lawyer, and I wasn't quite sure. And you know, he had had this terrible illness, and whether that sort of said, you know, maybe something, a tradition I should follow. And I realized that the sciences and I were uncomfortable companions at the best of times. And again, there was no competition to get into law school. All you had was to have an undergraduate degree from a university, and you were automatically admitted, because in the early 50s, a much smaller percentage of people went to university. I mean, there was quite a difference. So people who wanted to go to law school could be accommodated if you had an undergraduate degree. And
But not all of them made it through the whole program.
no, not, but most of them did. And, and I remember Pat Lesage likes to tell this sort of hokey story about going to Osgoode Hall and inquiring about admission, and Luella Sturdy, who's then the longtime registrar, said, well, have you got an undergraduate degree? Oh, yes, I'm from Ottawa. Were there any other questions? Well, did you do up your own shoelaces this morning?
Very basic skill sets.
Very basic. But no, it was, I mean, I didn't know quite what to expect, but because I had grown up in an atmosphere around my father's table, and he liked to talk about the trials, particularly he was interested in what he did for the little person and the disadvantaged person, and that had a great influence on me. And being at Osgoode Hall and having some of the great practitioners lecture to us, and being in the present and close to all the courts, I mean, I started haunting the courts very early on, and in my second year of Osgoode, having done a criminal law course, I was able to persuade the sheriff's secretary that I could start to take on criminal cases that could be tried in what they used to call the magistrate's court. So you're able to get quite intimately involved fairly quickly in just what was going on. And that, for me, was always an advantage, because it certainly increased my interest dramatically in the first few months at law school.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on the relevance of legal ethics, professionalism in the day-to-day life of lawyers today.
Well, I think it's, again, of huge importance. Now, perhaps a little more so when the profession was smaller, because certainly I learned at a very early age that, I mean, your reputation, I mean, was crucial, and as far as practicing law. Now, I think some lawyers are not as concerned about that, because the people they encounter in the profession may change from week to week, and not encounter themselves or each other again for months or years, and that, I think, presents special challenges for the profession, and the law schools in particular. I mean, as you know, we've had these conversations before, and particularly with Steve Gouge, and the importance of focusing students' student attention on these issues at an early stage, and because I think the reputation of the profession for integrity is clearly crucial to its future, and it doesn't always enjoy that reputation, obviously.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing some of your thoughts on these topics. I can't think of a more fitting conclusion to the CJO Advisory Committee on Professionalism Colloquia series. I can't think of a more fitting 2010 Goodman Lecture, and I know that the conversation we've started will carry on both for the rest of this event and hopefully in the hallways and classrooms and water coolers around the community for some time to come. It's been a pleasure, and thanks again for being a part of it.
Well, thank you very much, Lorne. I've enjoyed our session very much.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.